So I have two questions for you this morning. And depending on how you answer the second one, maybe a third question. So the first question, what is the best advice you've ever been given? You personally, what is the best advice you've ever been given? Second question, did you follow it? And depending on your answer to that question, if your answer is no, third question, why didn't you? If it was the best advice you've ever been given. Now, while you're thinking about that, just two quick stories. Zsa Zsa Gabor is a name familiar to some of you, probably not to many of you. A Hungarian-born U.S. actress who was well-known, famous for her beauty, for her quips, and for her many marriages, was invited to be on a television show that was trying to dispense wisdom to people who were in marriage or dating relationships that were struggling. So she was the celebrity guest, young woman, youngest, 20, 30, came to the microphone and asked her, said, I'm engaged to an extremely wealthy man, and I'm about to break the engagement. I need your help. He's really wealthy. He's given me like a Rolex, diamonds, gave me a stove for my house. You ready for this? Gave me a Rolls Royce. And I'm about to break the engagement. What is your advice to me? And Zsa Zsa said to her, here's my advice for you. Give him back the stove. That was it. That was the advice. I don't know if it's the best advice she ever got, but it was some advice. What about Frank Lloyd Wright? You may know that name because he was an incredibly gifted architect, designer, and builder. Designed and built buildings like the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, very well known. He had designed and built an elaborate, a beautiful home for a very wealthy man by the name of Hibbert Johnson. Hibbert Johnson was seated in his home not long after it had been completed, opulent, beautiful, seated at his swanky dining room table with a lot of different friends. It was raining hard outside, when suddenly the roof began to leak. And it began to drip right on the top of his bald head. Just drip, drip, drip. He was infuriated and embarrassed. Immediately called Frank Lloyd Wright, got him on the phone. It was the kind of phone that could be heard by others. He said, hey, this house you built me is leaking. Sitting here at my dining room table, it's leaking right on my head. It's like, what are you going to do about it? And Frank Lloyd Wright said to him, well, Hib, just move your chair. Just move your chair. I don't think that's the greatest advice he ever got. But I am curious if you would think in your mind, what's the best advice you've ever gotten? Secondly, did you follow it? Thirdly, if you didn't follow it, why? So I've been thinking about that the last week or so. What's the best advice I ever got? I've gotten some really good advice from some great people. But right up there near the top of the list was advice I got in my early 20s. I'd been hired by a conference to be a pastor. Now, if you're not familiar with the Seventh-day Adventist Church polity, our churches are divided into sisterhoods of churches called conferences. We're in what we call the Southeastern California Conference here. Our district headquarters are over in Riverside. Well, this wasn't the place, but it was a conference like that. I'd been hired to become a pastor, had pastored for a bit, and they were sponsoring me to seminary, meaning my fees would be covered, I would get a stipend, and I would have a job when I got back. But that particular conference was well known for sending people to seminary and then bringing them back about halfway through their degree, saying, we got to have pastors in the field, we need you, you got to come back to work. And so when the president said to me, we're going to send you to seminary, I wanted to get a degree. I wanted to study. I wanted to learn. I was wet behind the ears and pretty intimidated, but I got up enough courage to say to him, am I going to be left there the full time? Will I get to finish my degree? He said, yes. I said, praise the Lord and pass the donuts. Well, I didn't actually say that, but I thought something like that. So I went off to seminary. I was almost halfway through when my phone rang and his voice was on the other end of the line. And he said, we need you to come back. Got a church here, it needs a pastor, so we need you to come back to pastor. And I was like, dancing around in my mind trying to figure out what to say, and I kind of stumbled and bumbled, but I said, I want to finish my degree. Well, you can finish later. Find a seminary around here you can finish. That didn't sound good. And I said, well, I really don't want to go back right now. So there were 2 of us from that conference that year who had been sponsored. The other one's name was Mike. And he said to me, well, we've asked Mike to come back as well, and he said no, he doesn't want to come back, so we've dropped him. So just think about it. What? So we hang up, and I'm like, what am I going to do? So I immediately called my dad who was a pastor, talked with him. Talked with one of the professors at seminary who became very dear to me. I didn't know this, obviously, at the time, but he would later become the father-in-law of one of my dear friends, Carl Hafner. Talked with him. I talked with 2 pastors who had been senior pastors of college, the college church where I went to school. And I asked them, everyone, what should I do? Every one of them, univocal, absolutely unified in their advice, in their wisdom to me. And it can all be summarized in one word. Their wisdom to me was stay. Stay. Do not go back. You go back, you'll never finish your degree. Just count on it. Stay where you are. So a few days later, the phone rings again. I answer it, and it's him. And it's like, I was glad it was on the phone because my eyes are this big, and I'm sweating and trying to think. He says, well, we just wanted to check in. We need you to come back. You said you wanted to think about it. And I said, yeah, I want to think about it. I really don't want to come back. I want to finish my degree. And then I'm like, okay, wait, he's going to tell me. And there was this silence on the other end of the line. Then he says, well, I guess we'll let you stay since you're single. Okay? Now you have to understand that in that day and in that place, they said, no peach, no preach. In other words, get married. So what he was saying to me was, get married. I said, okay, well, thank you. I'm planning to stay. So I stayed, and I didn't get married for 4 or 5 years. Nothing passive aggressive about that. I just knew that Ana Elena Justiniano was down the road, and I was waiting until that meeting happened. But I look back to that experience and realized that was a crossroads in my life. Had I said, okay, I'm coming back, my life would have gone in one trajectory. Since I said, no, I'm going to stay, my life went in another trajectory. And it was due to the wisdom, to the advice, to the counsel of some people I respected and trusted. Their wisdom, their advice gave me the courage as a 23, 24-year-old young pastor to say this to somebody who truly intimidated me. In fact, Carl Hafner's father-in-law, who was one of the professors at the seminary, said to me, you stay right here, you finish. If they drop you, I will stand with you until you get another call. I've appreciated that all my life. So, best advice you've ever gotten. You have it in your mind? Second question, did you follow it? And if you didn't, why not? So we're in this series entitled A Word to the Wise. Last week's word was friendship. This week's word is listen. Listen to wisdom. Listen to counsel. Listen to advice. It is not nearly as easy as it sounds. But the book of Proverbs has a lot to say about it. That's where our series is coming from, the book of Proverbs. It says things like, in an abundance of counselors, there is safety, there is wisdom. It says a nation can fall for the lack of good counselors. It says the wise person listens to counsel and gets wiser in the process. So they're wise enough to hear it, but when they hear it, they get even more wise. Has a lot to say about it. But those aren't the ones I've chosen. For today, I've chosen Proverbs 13:10. Now again, like I said last week, you have to listen quickly because this goes by quickly. These Proverbs are not very long. This is what it says. Where there is strife, there is pride. But wisdom is found in those who take advice. Where there is strife, there is pride. But wisdom is found in those who take advice. Maybe what it's saying, the humble person shows their wisdom by listening to advice. The proud person creates conflict by refusing to listen. That's the core of what it's saying. Now, there's an interesting connection between this proverb and all these proverbs in this section and a story in ancient Israel. Because the one we believe who was the author of these proverbs was none other than King Solomon. King Solomon had a son named Rehoboam, who would become king after Solomon passed off the scene. I want to look a bit at Rehoboam, because he is Solomon's son, and ask the question, did your dad ever sit down and tell you some of the wisdom of these proverbs? Did you listen? And did you follow? And if you didn't, why didn't you? The story is told in 1 Kings 12, but let me set a little bit of the scene. So the kingdom of Israel became a monarchy under King Saul. Saul started well, ended awful. That was Saul. David came on the scene. David managed to unite all the tribes into a united monarchy, did some amazing things and did some amazingly bad things during his time. And then Solomon, his son, stepped up to the throne. He was next. Ancient Israel reached an unparalleled level of success, of wealth, under King Solomon. He took 7 years and built what must have been called one of the wonders of the ancient world, the first temple. It dominated the scene in Jerusalem. 7 years of work. He took 13 more years to build the royal palace complex, another amazing accomplishment in the world of his day. He had peace with other nations. He had power. He had prominence. In other words, under King Solomon, the nation reached an unparalleled level of success and grandeur. However, that came at a profound cost. It meant that he conscripted tens of thousands of people from his nation for his building projects. It meant that taxation was heavy. He drained the people dry. So by the time you come to the end of Solomon's life, by the time he passes away, Israel's in a great position. The buildings are immense and marvelous. They have prominence among the nations. They have peace, and they are exhausted and depleted. We're done. We got to rest. We got to recover our lives, our livelihoods. And that's when Rehoboam steps up to the throne. Now, no sooner does Rehoboam sit down on the throne than there's a knock at the door. It's Jeroboam. Jeroboam was one of his father Solomon's officials, but his father Solomon and Jeroboam got into this situation that wasn't good. It was bad enough that Jeroboam fled to Egypt because he was afraid that Solomon was going to have him killed. But as soon as he hears Solomon is dead, his son Rehoboam's on the throne, he comes back, requests an audience. He comes in before the king, and that's where we pick up the story in 1 Kings 12. 1 Kings 12:1, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. That's Solomon's son. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt, so they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam answered, "Go away for 3 days and then come back to me." So the people went away. So he's apparently listened to enough of his father's wisdom to know, don't just make a knee-jerk reaction. Don't just govern from your gut. But take some time to think it through and maybe even to get some wisdom, to get some counsel. So when they come to him and they say, look, Israel's in great shape, yes, but we're tired. We're depleted. Please ease off the accelerator. Give us some rest. He says, give me 3 days. I'll have an answer for you. Verse 6. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people? Yes, they replied, if today you will be a servant, notice the word, If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. It's a remarkable piece of advice, especially for the world of that day. For a king sitting as a potentate on his throne, whose word was often law, whose wish was his gift, who would have people do whatever he told them to do. They come to him and they tell him, look, here's the answer. Be a servant leader, a servant king. Serve them. Take your foot off the accelerator. Give them grace. You do that, they will love you. They will serve you. I'm going to guess that King Rehoboam, maybe later in life, would look back to this moment. Were he seated in a group like this, and did somebody ask him the question, what's the best advice you've ever gotten? I would guess he would look back at this and say, that was the best advice. And then our question would be, did you follow it? Well, interesting question. At least not yet, because he wants to get more advice. Now that in itself isn't a problem. After all, the book of Proverbs says, in an abundance of counselors, there is safety, there is wisdom. All right, so that's what you want. So here's what happens. Back to 1 Kings 12, verse 8. But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked, what is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? So he turns to his peers, which in itself is not a bad thing. Good wisdom isn't born of older people or younger people. It depends on the character of the people to whom you're talking. So he turns to his peers and he says, look, you're my age. You know the wisdom of the street. You know the culture. You know where people are. You know what is needed in this. So what advice would you give me? They're saying, lighten the load. Take your foot off the accelerator. We need to recover. And they say to him, pedal to the metal. Forget that. In fact, listen to what they say, verse 10. The young men who had grown up with him replied, these people have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Have mercy. So they listen to his request and they say, look, you're the king. Come on. What are you talking about? Don't be giving in to this. You need to be king. You need to dominate. You need to control. You need to direct. So when they say foot off the accelerator, you say pedal to the metal. When they say make it lighter, I'm going to make it heavier. That's what you need to do. So there's Rehoboam. Jeroboam has made the request. The people with him have made the request. He stands there with two sets of counsel, two sets of wisdom echoing in his ears. Be a servant leader or crush any opposition. Which one will you heed, Rehoboam? Verse 12. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam as the king had said, come back to me in 3 days. The king answered the people harshly. Rejecting the advice given him by the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, my father made your yoke heavy. I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord to fulfill the word of the Lord who had spoken to Jeroboam the son of Nebat through Ahijah the Shilonite. This is a key moment, not only for Rehoboam. This is a key moment, not only for his kingship. This is a key moment for the entire nation of ancient Israel. Didn't recognize it at the time, but recognized it quickly after. Because this now was the result of what he had done. I'm going to read this from the New Living Translation. It makes it a bit more clear. The next verses, when all Israel realized that the king had refused to listen to them, they responded, "Down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Back to your homes, O Israel. Look out for your own house, O David." So the people of Israel returned home, but Rehoboam continued to rule over the Israelites who lived in the towns of Judah. In other words, what happened when they heard his response was they said, "We're done with this, and we're done with you." And it became the critical, the pivotal moment in the history of ancient Israel, because what had up to this time been a united kingdom would now become a divided kingdom. The northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, the tribes of Israel with King Jeroboam, the southern kingdom, the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, the king was Rehoboam. Here was the point where they split. They would never again be reunited. Here's where the split occurred. As soon as that happened, Rehoboam realized how bad that was. And so he sent out people to try to reunite them. They promptly stoned his emissary. He leaped into his chariot, escaped barely for his life to Jerusalem, and the nation remained divided. It was an incredibly pivotal moment. But it wasn't just that. Notice what else happened. The northern kingdom, where Jeroboam went, a prophet had said, "You'll become a king." But it was up to him what kind of king he would be. And he did not become a good king. The northern kingdom of Israel would have 19 kings, starting with Jeroboam and 18 more to come. 19 kings. Every single one of them did evil in the sight of the Lord. Not one king could have an epitaph written over his grave. He did what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord. Not one. It set a trajectory in which they begin to circle the drain all the way up to 722 BC, when Assyria finally came and put them out of their misery. And it all started at that moment when Rehoboam is trying to decide, what advice will I listen to? Now, we asked Rehoboam, what's the best advice you ever got? In retrospect, I'm guessing he would say it was that moment. Did you follow it? No. Since you didn't follow it, why? Didn't have to do with age, it had to do with attitude. I want to read you from Eugene Peterson's paraphrase, The Message. How they tell his peer counselors, how they tell him to respond. Listen to what it says. The young Turks he'd grown up with said, "These people who complain, your father was too hard on us, lighten up. Well, tell them this. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist." By the way, Hebrew scholars tell us that word in the original is not waist. My little finger is thicker than my father's. If you think life under my father was hard, you haven't seen the half of it. My father thrashed you with whips. I'll beat you bloody with chains. Their whole attitude, their whole heart breathes a sense of violence, and we're in control, and we're going to dominate, and you're just our servants. We will do anything we have to do to keep you under our thumb. And somehow, Rehoboam connected with that. And that was the choice he made. What was our proverb again? Where there is strife, there is pride. But wisdom is found in those who take advice. Or that same verse from the New Living Translation, pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise. What it's saying is a humble person shows their wisdom by listening to advice. A proud person creates conflict by refusing to listen. That's what the proverb is driving at. That's exactly what you see in Rehoboam's choice. His choice led to a conflict that never ended. Now, a question. There's someone in your life about whom you say that person will not listen. They will not listen to advice. They just won't. Here's my question. When they see that image in their mind, here he is, here she is, this person will not listen to advice. Does that image look anything like you? Are they thinking about you? Wife, who are you thinking of? Be honest. Husband, who are you thinking of? I read something this week that said, men, when your wife says to you, go ahead, that's not permission. That's not wisdom. That's not advice. That's a warning. And when they say, wow, that's not amazement, that's like, how can any one person be so stupid? So who is that image that comes to your mind, or does your face come to anyone else's mind? Who is then there in your life who won't listen? Parents, you say that about your kids, but I actually have a question for the kids. Kids, when you think of somebody who will not listen to you, you're not thinking of parents, are you? I will tell you, there was a moment in my parenting, too far along. I'm not proud of it. What happened there was a God thing, not a Randy thing. It was a God thing. Moment with one of my precious kiddos where somehow the Spirit put it into me enough that I just asked them, would you be willing to tell me how I could be a better father? There was a look of, whoa, that said something to me. I need to do a lot more listening and a lot less talking. I don't know in your life. Is that true for you? I mean, what is it? What was it that caused Rehoboam to close his ears to truly sound wisdom? His own father, spoken of as the wisest man who ever lived, he must have heard some of these proverbs coming from Solomon's mouth. Speaking of the proverb, where there is pride, there is strife. SDA Bible Commentary talking about that word pride in the original language. Listen to what it says. Pride, in the Hebrew it's zadon, insolence or presumptuousness. The contrast here is between the one who is too proud to take advice and who feels insulted if anyone suggests that they need it, and the wise person who listens to the advice of people of experience. Not only does the proud person quarrel with those who would instruct them, but they get into other disputes of various kinds as a result of following their own ill-advised ways. We've all been there at some point in time, thinking, I should have listened. I should have listened. I should have listened to what they said. What Solomon is saying in his proverb is, it takes a truly humble person to be able to listen. Don't confuse humility with weakness. Humility can sometimes be the greatest show of strength. Somebody who is strong enough, solid enough in the person that they are actually comfortable in their skin. They can hear somebody challenge them. They can listen to somebody pour wisdom into their lives. But the proud person says, I don't need your advice. Stop talking. I know you're yammering. I don't want to hear it. The humble person truly listens. His name was David Bloom. He was weekend co-host of the Today Show. He was an embedded reporter in Operation Iraqi Freedom on April the 6th, 2003. He was not feeling well. Something was going on. He talked to physicians there in the field. They even contacted physicians overseas. What's going on? It's not good. They advised him, get out of there. He's been sitting in these cramped Army vehicles too long. We're concerned about DVT, deep vein thrombosis. April the 6th, 2003, he died. David Bloom's last ride from Business Week Online says this: he consulted military doctors and described his symptoms over the phone to overseas physicians. They suspected DVT or deep vein thrombosis and advised him to seek proper medical attention. He ignored their advice, swallowed some aspirins, and kept on working. On Sunday, he died of a pulmonary embolism. Bloom took several precautions to avoid becoming a casualty of war, but ignored the warnings of doctors who insisted that his life was in danger from a treatable condition. Bloom left behind a wife and 3 young daughters. This is a medical community. I considered asking physicians to stand and ask you a question, but I didn't want to create any awkwardness. But this is the question: whether you're a physician who has a lot of direct patient contact, or maybe in a specialty that doesn't require that as much, I'm going to venture a guess without asking. Every one of you, whether it's your own patient, or maybe back in residency if you're not in contact so much with patients now, or a colleague that you know, I'm going to guess that every one of you has at least one story of a patient to whom you gave medical counsel who didn't follow it and who paid for that. I don't know what the counsel was. Maybe it was like, hey, you and your lazy boy love each other a little too much. You need to get out and get acquainted with the sidewalks of your part of the town. Or maybe it'd probably be a pretty good idea if you stop eating so much red meat. Or it's time to stop smoking. Or any of 100 other pieces of wisdom, and the person didn't do it. Why? There can be many reasons why. It's too hard. It's too challenging. I don't think I can. I don't want to. Or who are you to tell me that? Those 2 letters, MD, give you the right to tell me? I know my body. In fact, that word pride here, from a commentary that tries to tease out for translators the nuances of words, this is what it says about that word pride in our proverb. Insolence, like pride or arrogance, refers to having an excessively high opinion of oneself. Embedded in the refusal to hear wisdom is often that. I don't need your wisdom. Leave me alone. So our word for today is listen. Just listen. It's a word I need, I know that. But I have this strange feeling I may not be the only one. And I got to thinking about Jesus. I want to listen to him more than anyone else. Jesus had this interesting little statement he would make. He would tell a story or make a statement, and then he would say this. It must have been really important to him, because if you follow the account all the way down in the book of Revelation, when Jesus again is speaking, and he's speaking to the 7 churches, every single time he finishes a message to one of those churches, he says the same thing. This must be pretty important to him. Here's what he says. The one who has ears, let them listen. Let them hear. It's not that different from Solomon's proverb. It's the same wisdom. So when you leave this morning, when you leave thinking about family, parents, kids, spouse, thinking about work, whatever has been entrusted to you where you work, here's my hope. That you will leave with a willingness to listen. That you will hear the word of Jesus. The one who has ears, let them hear. Because I have a strange suspicion that while the message might be coming from Jesus, the voice might sound like your spouse or your parent or your employee. So listen. The one who has ears to hear, let them hear, because that is truly a mark of wisdom.